Hello, this is Trevor with Vanultra. Today we're going to go over the rooftop tent locking mount. We're going to do an unboxing video and an install as well. So stay tuned, check it out. Hopefully you're going to like this product. We're going to go ahead and start opening these up and work on the install. All right, so here's the mount itself. You can check it out. This is all stainless steel and there's our lock inside. These are our aluminum spacers. These are actually anodized aluminum. They are not nylon or Delrin. They're machine 6061 and black anodized. And these spacers are actually going to protect the bolts. Okay, now we're moving on to the hardware here. So we have a couple different sized bolts. And we'll get into the details shortly, what the difference is there. We have our key, you got some anti-seize, and then from there the actual washers and nuts. And there's a few spares in there, just in case you drop it and it rolls down the driveway. We got you covered. Alright, so this is what is included in the box. Alrighty, now that we're done unboxing the locking mount, we're going to move on to the install. To do the install, we're actually going to need to remove the mount that we're going to replace. We need to loosen up the other mount so the tent can be lifted so we can install the hardware. To do that, we're going to use a 13mm socket. It doesn't have to be a deep socket, and we're going to use a ratchet with it. We recommend not to use power tools because power tools on stainless steel can actually cause galling, and it might be a lot harder to remove your hardware if it gets seized up. So let's get started. So this is what came off the tent. We got two lock nuts and then the strap. We're going to put those aside. So this hardware, all we're going to do is just remove the nuts and the plate, and we're going to leave the bolts alone. The only reason we're doing this is because the tent has to physically be lifted up, and we can't do that with this mount fully tightened. Alrighty, so we just loosened up the three corners over there, took the hardware out so we can actually physically lift the tent. We need to lift the tent because we need to get this hardware. It's on the other side of the crossbar. We gotta lift the tent and slide the hardware out. So we're gonna do that now. Lift it up and slide these guys out and bring it back down. So we just lifted this corner and removed the hardware. If you're gonna install two mounts, we recommend doing diagonal corners. You can use this one and that one, or vice versa. You can use this corner and that corner over there. We need to know what size crossbar your vehicle has before we move too much further, because that tells us whether we're going to use the longer bolts or the shorter bolts. So what you need to do ideally is use calipers. If not, you can use a tape measure. You need to measure the height, the thickness of the crossbar. This tube right here is 2 inches. And our rule of thumb is if it's 1.56 or greater, then use the long bolts. If it's shorter or smaller than 1.56, then you're going to use the shorter bolts. So the vehicle we're installing on today has square rectangular crossbar and it's 1.5 inches. So because it's less than 1.56, we're going to use the shorter bolts. So we recommend to follow the instruction booklet. This is the important part about which bolts to use, the longer or shorter ones. First step we're going to do, we're going to take the slider that came with the tent, install the slider. Okay, then we're going to take 2 of these washers, drop them on, drop on the second one. Then we're going to use this female spacer. This female spacer gets installed like that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you had a crossbar that was taller than 1.56, then the assembly is going to be slightly different. I'm going to show you just for example. I'm going to install the slider that came with the tent. Okay, Then I'm going to install 2 of these flat washers. Now I'm going to use this spacer, this aluminum spacer that's solid. It's like a disc. That's going to go on. And then I'm going to use the female spacer. Okay, and we're going to get a nut. So this is the assembly if you're greater than 1.56, and this is the assembly if you're less than 1.56. So we've included a little package of anti-seize. It's important to install anti-seize on this thread. It's going to prevent galling, and it's going to make it a lot easier when you're installing it. So I'm just going to generously put some here on the thread. Alrighty, I just put one of these together. I'm going to repeat the process. It actually is easier if you install anti-seize onto the bolt before you put it together. Just putting a little bit there. I'm going to rub it on with my finger. And as I said before, we're going to reuse the slider. Install this. Then we're going to use the 2 flat washers. Okay, then our female spacer. Then our hex nut. I'm sorry, a lock nut. Okay, now we're going to tighten this lock nut down into the bottom. One of the easiest ways to do that is to actually expose the head of the hex nut here. So I'm going to put this on a little wrench, and then I'm going to use my ratchet on the other side. Now you're probably going to need to use a deep socket here because this is going to need to fully seat bottom down into there. So here we go. Now I can just tighten this up. If you have a vise at your house, it'll be easier if you take the vise, the jaws like this, and clamp the hex head. And then from there you can grab your tool and tighten it up that way. That's probably going to be the easiest way. I don't have a vise, so I'm just going to use a wrench. It's going to be a little bit tricky, but I'll just have to hold it with one hand. And the other hand, I'm going to tighten this up. Now I'm going to start going a bit faster and seat it all the way down. Okay, you'll get to a point where the tool is actually going to pop off and you won't be able to use that anymore. So this is actually easy enough. I can do it by hand. Okay. Alrighty, so we just tightened these up by hand and now we're going to torque them. We don't have a good tool to do the full torque. So we're actually going to use the tent frame rail as our tool. I'm going to slide that back in there, and now I can tighten this up all the way. And I'm actually going to torque this to spec. We have 15 foot-pounds, which is the same as 180 inch-pounds. I use my torque wrench here, and there we are. There's that one. Slide this out, repeat the process, use our tool, use the tent frame rail as a tool. 15 foot-pounds, 180 inch-pounds, and there we are. Those are ready. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and install it on the other side. So to do that, I'm going to lift the tent with some help, slide it to the other side, bring it back down, install the second mount, or sorry, the hardware, and now that part's done. We're ready to move on to the next step. So now we have the locking mount here. I'm actually going to use the key, open this up, take it apart, and I'm going to install the base up on the tent. To do that, I'm going to use the key. I'm going to install it here, rotate it, and then the key has to pop out in the same spot that you inserted it. You can do a full revolution if you want, but the big thing is that this is popped out. Once it's popped out, I'm actually going to press on these 2 tabs, these intersecting tabs. Push it there, and this guy pops out. There we go. Okay, so this is now separated. I'm going to then use these spacers, these male spacers. They're going to insert through like that. And then this will get installed onto the hardware that we have on the tent. Now the orientation doesn't matter. It's really up to your preference. I would just recommend that make sure that the key, the lock, is accessible. Before we install this, I'm actually going to reinstall a little bit of anti-seize onto the bolts. Now this is actually going to be easier to do it since I am by myself. I'm just going to do one side at a time to get it started. So I'm going to pop that in there and then start the nut here. There we go. Okay, now that one side started, I'm going to do the other side here. Put the male spacer in, install it, and then install the lock nut. Okay, before you fully tighten this up, make sure that your tent's where you want it, that it's centered on the vehicle. Otherwise, you're gonna have to loosen this off. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna quickly align the tent. We're gonna come back and retighten it. So we just adjusted the alignment of the tent. We got it right where we want it, front to back, side to side. And now we're ready to tighten everything up. Also make sure that you have bolts on either side of the crossbar in all four corners before you tighten this up. Otherwise, you're gonna have to remove it again. Now, as you're tightening it up, make sure you oscillate between the sides. And you also need to make sure that these spacers intersect each other and are coincident. If it gets jammed or wedged up, you're probably gonna have to back it off and restart. So now I'm gonna start tightening it up. Okay, that feels pretty good. Now I'm gonna install this cover plate. Now this cover plate is not symmetrical. You'll see that this welded tab is offset to one side. We want to use this tab on the side opposite of the lock. So the lock is on this face, so the tab I want on this other side. Now to install that, you can come straight in. If you have an SUV and there's not a lot of room in there, then you may have to come in at an angle and slide it in like that. I'm in a truck right now, so it's real easy to come in straight vertical and install this. To do that, I'm just gonna push it straight in. And then from there, the last step is to engage the lock. Just gonna push that in and you're ready to go. You're ready for the trail. This mount is fully locked in and ready to go. Of course, it would pop off.
No, we're not.
So now that the Vanultra mount is on, we're going to reinstall the remaining tent hardware that came with the tent. Make sure that all four corners are tight, and then you're ready for the trail. When you're ready to remove your tent, you're going to have to remove this locking mount. To do that, first open up the dust cover, then insert the key inside the mount. There's a little notch on here. You want to make sure you line that notch up with your key. Okay, now rotate the key until this pops out. Once the lock pops out, then you know that it's unlocked. I'm going to rotate it back to the same orientation and then remove the key. To remove the cover plate, it's easiest to use your fingers. Push down on these interlocks and remove the cover plate. Once the cover plate's removed, use your 13mm socket and ratchet and loosen up the nuts. Loosen up these nuts all the way, and then this cover, this base plate can come off, and then your tent's ready to be removed.